The Last Letter Home. Part 1. The Letters That Never Stopped. Sarah Miller sat at her kitchen table, staring at the envelope in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she traced the familiar handwriting that spelled out her name and address. The postmark was from last week, but that couldn't be right. Her husband, James, had been declared missing in action 3 years ago. This has to be a mistake, she whispered to herself, her morning coffee growing cold beside her. It was the 4th letter she had received in the past 2 months. Each one came in the same cream-colored envelope, with the same careful handwriting she would know anywhere. James had always written his letters this way during his deployments, her name written in his neat, slanted writing, their home address perfectly centered. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the day the military officers had come to her door. It was a sunny Tuesday morning in April 2019, not unlike today. They told her James's unit had been attacked during a routine patrol in Afghanistan. Several soldiers were killed, others were found, but James had simply vanished. No body, no trace, just gone. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope, pulling out 2 pages filled with James's writing. My dearest Sarah, the sun is setting here, and it reminds me of the way the light used to hit your hair when we would sit on our back porch. Do you still watch the sunset from there? I hope you do. Some things should never change. Today was rough. There are things I need to tell you, things I should have told you long ago, but I never knew how. Do you remember the antique shop in Boston where we bought that old compass? Go there. Ask for Mr. Chun. Show him the compass. He'll know. I love you more than ever, James. Sarah walked to their bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of her dresser. Under a stack of old sweaters lay a wooden box where she kept all of James's letters. She pulled out the 3 previous ones she had received since February. The first had asked about their apple tree in the backyard, the one they had planted together when they first bought the house. The second mentioned a coffee shop in downtown Portland where they had their first date. The third talked about a hidden box of photographs in their attic. She had found the box exactly where the letter said it would be, filled with pictures she had never seen before. They showed James in places she didn't recognize, with people she had never met. In one photo, he stood in front of a building with Chinese characters on its sign, his arm around an older Asian man. Sarah walked to their study and picked up the old compass from the bookshelf. She and James had bought it on their honeymoon 5 years ago. It had always seemed like a simple souvenir, but now she studied it more carefully. The brass was tarnished, and the glass was slightly scratched, but something about it felt different now. She turned it over in her hands and noticed something she had never seen before. Tiny numbers etched into the base. 47-92-13. Sarah sat down at her computer and searched for Mr. Chun Antiques Boston. Several shops came up, but one caught her eye. Chen's Curiosities, serving Boston since 1962. It was only a 2-hour drive away. She called the school where she taught 3rd grade and asked for a personal day. As she packed her bag, she looked at the photo from the attic again. Who was that man with James? Why had he never mentioned him? The James she knew had been an open book, or at least she had thought so. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend. Lisa, coffee today? Sarah typed back, rain check. Something's come up with James. Lisa's response was immediate. Sarah, honey, we talked about this. You need to let go. But Sarah couldn't let go. Not when these letters kept arriving. Not when they contained information only James could know. Not when they led her to real things, real places, real clues. She grabbed her car keys and the compass. The morning traffic would be heavy, but she could make it to Boston by noon. As she backed out of her driveway, she glanced at their apple tree, its branches heavy with spring blossoms. James's voice echoed in her memory. Planted here, love. This way, we'll always have something growing with us. What she didn't notice was the dark blue car parked across the street, or the man inside it watching her leave. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. She's on the move, he said quietly. Headed east. Just like he said she would be. The drive to Boston gave Sarah too much time to think. The letters had started arriving exactly 3 years after James disappeared. Each one was dated recently, but they contained memories from their past. And now this mention of Mr. Chun. It was the first real lead she had to something beyond their shared memories. As she drove, she remembered the last normal day with James. He had been quiet at breakfast, distracted. He had hugged her longer than usual before leaving for his deployment. Had he known something then? Had he been trying to tell her something? The GPS guided her through Boston's narrow streets until she found herself in front of a small storefront with a faded red awning. The window display was cluttered with old clocks, maps, and various antiques. A bell tinkled as she pushed open the door. The shop smelled of old books and furniture polish. An elderly Asian man looked up from behind the counter, his eyes sharp behind round glasses. "Can I help you?" he asked. Sarah pulled out the compass with trembling hands. "I'm looking for Mr. Chun. My husband, James Miller. He told me to come." The old man's expression changed instantly. He walked quickly to the door, flipped the open sign to closed, and locked it. "I've been waiting for you, Mrs. Miller," he said softly. "For 3 years. I've been waiting." Sarah's heart pounded. "You know my husband? You know where he is?" Mr. Chun shook his head slowly. "I don't know where he is now. But I know what he was doing before he disappeared. And I know why the letters are coming." He gestured for her to follow him to a back room. On a table lay a large manila envelope. "James left this with me 4 years ago," Mr. Chun said. "He made me promise to give it to you if you ever came asking questions. He said you would come when you were ready. When you had started receiving the letters." Sarah reached for the envelope with shaking hands, her mind spinning with questions. As she opened it, a small key fell out, along with a handwritten note in James's writing. "Sarah, my love, if you're reading this, then you've started receiving my letters. There's so much I need to tell you, so much you need to know. But first, you need to understand why I couldn't tell you before. Everything starts with a storage unit in Portland. Unit 473. This key opens it. Be careful who you trust. And remember, I love you more than anything, James. Sarah looked up at Mr. Chan, who was watching her with sad eyes. Your husband, he said quietly, was a very brave man, but he discovered something he wasn't supposed to know. And now, Mrs. Miller, you're about to discover it too. The bell above the shop door rattled violently. Someone was trying to get in. Mr. Chen's eyes widened. They followed you, he whispered. Quick! There's a back door. Go. Take the envelope. And Mrs. Miller. He pressed a small piece of paper into her hand. When you get to the storage unit, remember these numbers. August 14th, 22. Now go. Sarah clutched the envelope to her chest and ran through the back door, emerging into an alley. As she ran toward her car, she could hear voices from inside the shop, male voices, demanding answers. She started her car with trembling hands and pulled away from the curb, her mind racing. The letters, the compass, Mr. Chun, the storage unit, what had James gotten himself into? And more importantly, who was trying to stop her from finding out? As she merged onto the highway back to Portland, she glanced in her rearview mirror. The same dark blue car she hadn't noticed earlier was 3 cars behind her, matching her every lane change. The mystery of the letters was only beginning to unravel, and Sarah had a feeling that her life would never be the same again. Part 2. The storage unit. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove back to Portland. Every few minutes, she checked her mirrors. The dark blue car was still following her, staying 3 or 4 cars behind. Her heart wouldn't stop racing. She picked up her phone and called Lisa. Sarah, are you okay? Lisa answered on the first ring. Lisa, I need help, Sarah said quickly. Can you meet me at the safe lock storage on Madison Street? The one near the mall. What's going on? I can't explain right now, but I think someone's following me. I don't want to be alone when I get there. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Lisa said without hesitation. This was why Sarah loved her best friend. She never asked too many questions in an emergency. Sarah took a different route than usual, making extra turns to make sure the blue car was really following her. It was whoever was behind the wheel knew what they were doing. She thought about everything that had happened that morning. Mr. Chun had been waiting for her. He knew about the letters. James had left something for her in that storage unit. None of it made sense, but she knew one thing. Her quiet life as a third-grade teacher had just become very complicated. The storage facility was a large, orange building with rows of garage-style units. Sarah parked near the office, relieved to see Lisa's red SUV already waiting. Lisa jumped out of her car as soon as she saw Sarah. Okay, what's happening? Lisa asked, hugging her. You're white as a ghost. Sarah showed her the envelope from Mr. Chan and quickly explained everything. The letters, the compass, the mysterious men at the antique shop. As she talked, she kept watching the entrance to the storage facility, but the blue car hadn't followed her in. "Sarah," Lisa said gently, "are you sure this is a good idea? Maybe we should call the police." "And tell them what? That I'm getting letters from my missing husband? That some men scared me at an antique shop? They'll think I'm crazy." Sarah pulled out the key from the envelope. "I need to know what's in that unit." They found Unit 473 at the end of a long row. It was smaller than Sarah expected, about the size of a one-car garage. The padlock was old and rusty. Sarah's hands shook as she put the key in the lock. It turned with a loud click. "Ready?" Lisa asked, holding her phone's flashlight up. Sarah nodded and pulled up the rolling door. The metal rattled loudly in the quiet facility. The unit was mostly empty except for a large metal filing cabinet and a few cardboard boxes. Everything was covered in dust. Sarah walked in slowly, her shoes leaving footprints on the dusty floor. "Look for anything with those numbers Mr. Chan gave me," Sarah told Lisa. August 14th, 22. They started searching. The cardboard boxes contained old clothes and books, nothing special. Sarah moved to the filing cabinet. It was locked. "Wait," she said, looking at the numbers again. "Maybe it's not a date. Maybe it's a combination." She turned the dial on the filing cabinet. 8 to the right, 14 to the left, 22 to the right. The lock clicked open. Inside, the top drawer was filled with folders. Each one had a different city name written on it: Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, Cairo. Sarah opened one and found photographs, documents in different languages, and handwritten notes in James's writing. The second drawer held more personal items: a journal, some USB drives, and a stack of sealed envelopes with dates written on them, future dates. The last envelope was dated December 2025. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, picking up the journal. James wasn't just a soldier. He was something else. She opened the journal to the first page and read, "If you're reading this, Sarah, then I'm either dead or disappeared. I'm sorry for all the secrets. I never wanted to lie to you, but this was the only way to keep you safe. I work for a special unit within the military. We track dangerous people who want to hurt our country. But 3 years ago, I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Someone in our own government was helping these people. When I tried to report it, things went wrong. The letters you're receiving, I wrote them before I disappeared. I knew they would try to make me vanish, so I planned ahead. Mr. Chan helped me set up a system. Each letter contains clues that will lead you to the truth. But be careful, love. The people I was tracking are still out there. And now they're probably tracking you too." Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the page, but a sudden noise made her stop. Footsteps were echoing down the row of storage units. "Someone's coming," Lisa whispered. Sarah quickly grabbed the journal and the stack of dated envelopes, stuffing them into her bag. She closed the filing cabinet and locked it. The footsteps were getting closer. Back door. Lisa pointed to a small emergency exit at the back of the unit. Most of these units have them. They slipped through the back door just as voices reached Unit 473. "It's open," a man's voice said. "Search everything," another voice ordered. "Find those files." Sarah and Lisa crouched behind a large dumpster, watching through a gap as two men in dark suits entered the unit. They were the same men from the antique shop. "We need to get out of here," Lisa whispered. They crawled along the back of the units until they reached the end of the row, then ran to their cars. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely get her key in the ignition. As they drove away separately, Sarah looked in her rearview mirror. The men were running out of the storage unit, but they were too late. She had what James wanted her to find. That night, safe in her house with all the doors locked, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with James's journal and the stack of future-dated letters. Lisa sat across from her, both of them still trying to process what had happened. "What are you going to do?" Lisa asked. Sarah picked up the next sealed envelope in the stack. It was dated for next week. "I'm going to do what James wanted," she said. "I'm going to follow his clues. I'm going to find out what happened to him." She opened the envelope and began to read, knowing that each word might bring her closer to the truth or put her in more danger. The letter began, "My dearest Sarah, by now you've found my journal. The next thing you need to find is in the basement of the library where we first met. But before you go there, there's something you need to know about the day we met. It wasn't an accident." Part 3. The Library Secret. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She kept reading James's journal, learning more about his secret life. Each page made her question everything she thought she knew about their relationship. The next morning, she called in sick to school again. She sat in her kitchen, reading the newest letter over and over. "My dearest Sarah, by now you've found my journal. The next thing you need to find is in the basement of the library where we first met. But before you go there, there's something you need to know about the day we met. It wasn't an accident. I was assigned to protect you. Your father's research made you a target, but you never knew. Do you remember how he died in that car accident when you were in college? It wasn't an accident either. I never told you what your father really did. He wasn't just a chemistry professor. He was developing something dangerous, something that could change everything. The people who wanted his research thought it died with him. They didn't know he had hidden it all. And they didn't know he had given you the key to finding it. Look at the silver necklace he gave you for your 16th birthday. The one you never take off. Really look at it. I love you, James." Sarah's hand went to the silver necklace she always wore. It was a simple chain with a small pendant that had swirling designs on it. Her father had given it to her 2 years before he died. "Never take it off," he had said. "It's more special than you know." She went to her jewelry box and got out a magnifying glass. Under the glass, the swirling designs weren't just designs. They were tiny numbers and letters, carved so small she had never noticed them before. "Oh, Dad," she whispered. "What were you really working on?" Her phone rang, making her jump. It was Lisa. "The men in the blue car are back," Lisa said. "They're parked across from your house." Sarah went to her window and carefully peeked out. Sure enough, the dark blue car was there. "I'll pick you up," Lisa said. "They'll follow your car if you drive. I'll come in through the back street and meet you in the alley behind your house." 10 minutes. Sarah quickly packed her bag. James's journal, the letters, her father's necklace. She put on a baseball cap and sunglasses, then slipped out her back door. Lisa was waiting in the alley. Sarah jumped in, ducking down as they drove past the blue car. The men inside didn't even look their way. The Central Library was a big old building downtown where Sarah and James had first met 5 years ago. She had been looking for a book in the history section, and he had reached for the same book at the same time. At least, that's what she had always thought happened. "I'll keep watch," Lisa said as they parked. "If those men show up, I'll text you." The library was quiet this early. Sarah went straight to the basement stairs. She remembered James's words from the journal. The truth is hidden in plain sight. The basement was where they kept old newspapers and city records. It smelled like old paper and dust. A few students sat at tables, studying. Everything looked normal. Sarah walked to the shelf where she and James had reached for the same book. She remembered exactly which one it was: Portland History. 1950 to 1960. She pulled it out. Inside the book was an envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it. "My clever Sarah, you found it. Just like I knew you would. Now look at the numbers on your necklace under the magnifying glass again. They're not just numbers, they're coordinates. Your father encoded them into a design that only looks decorative. Those coordinates lead to his Real laboratory. The one where he hid all his research. The one they never found. But Sarah, once you find it, everything will change. The people following you, they're not just after me anymore. They're after what your father hid. They're after you." In the journal, find the page marked with a red dot. It explains everything about your father's work. About why it's so dangerous. About why I had to protect you. I'm sorry I lied about how we met. But I'm not sorry I fell in love with you. That was real. It's still real. There's a key taped to the back of this book. Take it. You'll need it soon. I love you, James. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. They're here. 2 men just walked in. Get out now. Sarah quickly took the key from the back of the book and put the book back. She had just turned toward the stairs when she heard footsteps coming down. She ducked behind a shelf, her heart pounding. Through the gaps between books, she could see 2 men in dark suits scanning the basement. The same men from the storage unit. A hand touched her shoulder. Sarah almost screamed, but another hand covered her mouth. Quiet, a woman's voice whispered, "Follow me." Sarah turned to see an elderly librarian with gray hair and kind eyes. The woman pressed a finger to her lips and motioned for Sarah to follow her. They went through a door marked staff only, then through a maze of shelves filled with old books. The librarian led her to another door that opened into an alley. "James said you would come," the librarian said quietly. "He made me promise to help you if you did. Now go. They won't find you this way." Sarah ran down the alley to where Lisa was waiting in her car. "Who was that?" Lisa asked as they drove away. "Another person who knew James's secrets," Sarah said. She looked at the key in her hand, then at her necklace. "And now I know why my father died. Why James came into my life. Why these people are after me." She pulled out James's journal and found the page with the red dot. As she read it, her eyes grew wide. "Lisa," she whispered, "my father found a way to hack into any computer system in the world, without being detected, without leaving any trace. In the wrong hands. It could start a war," Lisa finished. "Or stop one," Sarah said. "And the coordinates to find it have been hanging around my neck for 10 years. Her phone buzzed. Another text, but not from Lisa. An unknown number. "Mrs. Miller, we need to talk about your father's work. And about your husband. Meet us, or the next letter from James will be his last." Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing. Were they bluffing? Did they really know where James was? And most importantly, were they the people she should be running from, or the people she should be running to? The coordinates on her necklace suddenly felt very heavy against her skin. Somewhere they led to answers. But those answers could change everything, or get her killed. She looked at Lisa. "I need to find my father's lab. Today. Before they do. I know somebody who can help us read those coordinates," Lisa said. "But Sarah, are you sure you want to know what's at the end of this?" Sarah thought about James's words in the journal. "Sometimes the truth is more dangerous than lies." "I don't have a choice anymore," she said. "They're not going to stop coming after me. And James, if he's alive, he needs my help." As they drove toward Lisa's contact, Sarah noticed something else. The blue car wasn't following them anymore. Somehow, that made her even more nervous. The game was changing, and she was no longer just following clues. She was in the middle of something much bigger than she had imagined. Part 4. The Hidden Laboratory. "Turn here," Lisa said, pointing to a small repair shop on the edge of town. The sign read Mike's Computer Repair. Sarah looked doubtful. "This is where your contact works?" "Mike used to work for the military as a codebreaker," Lisa explained. "He's the smartest person I know with computers. If anyone can help us understand those coordinates, it's him." They walked into the shop. A tall man with wild gray hair and thick glasses looked up from behind the counter. His eyes widened when he saw Lisa. "Lisa, is this about?" He stopped when he saw Sarah. "Mike, this is Sarah Miller," Lisa said. "James Miller's wife." Mike quickly locked the shop's front door and turned the open sign to closed. I knew James, he said quietly. Good man. One of the best. Come to the back room. The back room was filled with computers and strange-looking equipment. Mike pulled out a powerful microscope and carefully examined Sarah's necklace. Brilliant, he whispered. Your father was a genius, Mrs. Miller. These aren't just coordinates. They're encrypted. Each tiny mark means something different depending on how the light hits it. He typed rapidly on his computer, muttering to himself. After 20 minutes, he sat back. Got it, he said. The lab is in the mountains, about 2 hours from here. But he looked worried. There's something else. A warning message hidden in the code. It says, the key is in the blood. What does that mean? Sarah asked. DNA recognition, probably, Mike said. Your father's lab. It won't open for just anyone. It needs your DNA. Your blood. He made sure only family could access it. Sarah's phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. Running out of time, Mrs. Miller. The mountains are dangerous at night. They decoded it too, Sarah whispered. They know where the lab is. But they can't get in without you, Mike said. That's why they're following you instead of just going there themselves. Mike printed out a map with the lab's location marked. There's an old mining road that leads close to it. But Sarah, be careful. If what James told me about your father's work is true. What did James tell you? Mike hesitated. He said your father found a way to access any computer system in the world without detection. But it was more than that. The program could also predict things. Future events. It's how your father knew he was in danger. It's how he knew you would need protection. That's why he assigned James to protect me, Sarah said softly. And why he fell in love with you for real, Lisa added. That part wasn't in the plan. Sarah's phone buzzed one more time. Tick-tock, Mrs. Miller. We need to go now, Sarah said. Before it gets dark. Mike grabbed her arm. Wait. Take this. He handed her a small device. It's a signal jammer. It'll block any phones or tracking devices within 50 feet. And Sarah, James left something else here for you. He went to a safe in the corner and came back with a gun. I don't. I've never. Sarah started. James taught you to shoot, Lisa said suddenly. At the shooting range. Remember? You told me you thought it was just a fun date. Sarah remembered. James had been so patient, teaching her proper stance, how to aim, how to breathe. He was preparing you, Mike said. Just in case. The drive to the mountains was tense. They took Lisa's car, hoping to avoid being followed. The signal jammer sat between them, its little green light blinking steadily. The mining road was rough and narrow. Trees pressed in on both sides. As they climbed higher, the sun began to set. There, Sarah pointed to a barely visible path. The coordinates say it's up there. They parked and continued on foot. After 10 minutes of climbing, they found it, a metal door built into the side of the mountain, almost invisible under vines and moss. "How long has this been here?" Lisa whispered. Sarah brushed away some vines and found a small panel. When she wiped off the dust, a light came on. A needle extended from a small hole. "The key is in the blood," Sarah said. She pressed her finger to the needle. It pricked her skin. The panel beeped, and the door clicked open. "Mrs. Miller." Sarah and Lisa spun around. Two men in dark suits stood 20 feet away. Guns pointed at them. A third man stepped forward, older, gray-haired, wearing an expensive suit. "I'm Director Walsh, CIA," he said. "We've been trying to talk to you." "By following me? Threatening me?" Sarah's hand tightened on her gun. "Your father's work is a matter of national security," Walsh said. "And your husband. He complicated things." "Where is he?" Sarah demanded. "Safe. For now. But if you open that lab, if that program gets out, do you know how many people would die for it? How many governments would kill to have it?" "It's not yours," Sarah said. "My father hid it for a reason." "Your father was a traitor," Walsh snapped. "He was gonna sell it to the Chinese." "Liar!" Sarah's hand shook. "He was protecting it from people like you." "Sarah," Lisa warned. The men were getting closer. Suddenly, a shot rang out. One of the suited men fell, clutching his leg. Everyone turned toward the sound. A figure stepped out of the trees. Sarah's heart stopped. It was James. He looked different, thinner, with a beard and long hair, but it was him. He held a rifle steadily aimed at Walsh. "Hello, sir," James said calmly. "Sorry I missed the last few staff meetings." "Miller," Walsh growled. "Still alive, I see." "Sarah," James said, not taking his eyes off Walsh, "open the lab." "Now." "Don't," Walsh shouted. "You don't understand what's really going on." Sarah looked at James. The husband she thought she'd lost. The man who had lied to protect her. The soldier who had fallen in love with his assignment. He met her eyes. "Trust me, love. One last time." Sarah turned and ran into the lab. Behind her, she heard more gunshots, shouts, the sound of fighting. The lab was a single large room, filled with old computers. On a desk in the center sat a small black box with a single red button. Another panel waited for her blood. Sarah pricked her finger again. The black box hummed to life. Numbers began flowing across the screen. Predictions. Warnings. The future itself, decoded into data. And then she saw it, the truth about everything. About why her father really died. About what James had discovered. About who Walsh really was. She reached for the button just as footsteps thundered behind her. The future hung in the balance. and Sarah Miller, daughter, wife, teacher, had to decide who to trust and what to do with the power to change everything. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Someone was walking toward her. Sarah turned, her finger on the button, ready to face whatever came next. Part 5. The truth reveals itself. The footsteps got closer. Sarah kept her finger on the button, her heart pounding. The predictions on the screen kept flowing: numbers, dates, events that hadn't happened yet. James walked in, lowering his rifle. His face was bruised from the fight. "Walsh?" Sarah asked. "Unconscious. Lisa's watching him and his men. The signal jammer is keeping them from calling for backup." He moved closer, looking at the black box. "So this is it. Your father's life work." Sarah looked at the screen again. "James. According to this, Walsh isn't CIA. He's working for someone else. Someone worse." "I know," James said quietly. "That's what I discovered 3 years ago. Walsh and his team. They're part of a secret group. They call themselves the Division. They've been hiding inside the government for years, selling secrets to the highest bidder." "But why did you disappear? Why didn't you tell me?" James touched her face gently. "Because they had people watching you. If I had tried to warn you, they would have killed you. I had to make them think I was running away with the information. Had to make them follow me instead of looking too closely at you." "The letters," Sarah said. "How did you manage that?" "I wrote hundreds of them before I left. Gave them to people I trusted, Mr. Chun, the librarian, others. They were supposed to mail them in order at specific times. Each one leading you here, but only when you were ready." Sarah looked at the screen again. New predictions were appearing. Walsh's rail boss arriving in 47 minutes. A helicopter approaching from the east. More division agents surrounding the mountain. "They're coming," she whispered. "Yes," James said. "But they don't know what your father's program really does, Sarah. They think it just predicts the future. Shows them what stocks to buy, what wars to start, who's going to win elections. What does it really do? It doesn't just predict the future," James explained. "It shows every possible future. Every choice, every outcome. Your father built it to help people make better decisions, to prevent disasters before they happen. But in the wrong hands, they could make sure only their preferred futures come true," Sarah finished. "They could control everything." Suddenly, the predictions on the screen changed. Sarah saw new images. Walsh waking up, Lisa in danger, a future where the Division took control. Millions of deaths. Wars started for profit. Elections rigged. The world reshaped by people who only cared about power. But then she saw other possibilities. The Division exposed. Their plans stopped. A better future. Peace instead of war. Truth instead of lies. "The button," Sarah said. "What does it do?" It sends everything, all the evidence about the division, about Walsh, about their plans, to every news organization, every government watchdog, every law enforcement agency in the world. All at once. They won't be able to stop it, deny it, or hide from it. But Sarah looked at him. There's something else, isn't there? James nodded sadly. Once we push it, the program deletes itself. Forever. Your father built it that way. He knew it was too dangerous to exist, even to do good. The temptation to misuse it would always be too strong. Sarah heard helicopter blades in the distance. They're almost here, James said. Whatever we do, we have to do it now. More predictions flashed across the screen. The helicopter landing in 15 minutes. Walsh's boss, a powerful senator, ready to take the program. Their entire future hanging on this moment. Sarah looked at James. All those nights I thought you were dead. I never stopped loving you, he said. Everything I did, the lies, the disappearing, it was all to protect you, and to give you the chance to make this choice yourself. What choice? To decide what happens to your father's work. It has to be you, Sarah. You're the only one who can make this decision. Push the button and we expose the truth but lose the program forever. Don't push it and maybe we can find another way to stop them, but risk them eventually getting control of it. The helicopter was getting closer. Lisa ran in. They're waking up, and I see more cars coming up the mountain. Sarah looked at the screen one last time. So many possible futures. So many choices. Her father had built this to help people, but James was right. As long as it existed, people would kill for it. She thought about her father's last words to her. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. She thought about James, giving up 3 years of his life to protect her and this moment. She thought about all the letters, leading her here, preparing her for this decision. The helicopter was almost there. Sarah Miller, who had lost her father, lost her husband, and found the truth, looked at the red button under her finger, and she made her choice. Part 6. The final letter. Sarah pushed the button. The screen lit up bright blue, and for a moment, everything else seemed to stop. The helicopter noise, the shouting outside, even her own breathing. It all faded away as the program began its final task. It's done, James said softly, watching the screen. Everything is being sent. Every piece of evidence. Every secret. Every crime. The black box hummed louder, then sparked. The screen went dark. Just like that, her father's life work was gone. Outside, chaos erupted. Through the lab's small window, they could see the helicopter landing. But something was wrong. Other helicopters were appearing, ones with FBI markings. The program, Lisa said, looking at her phone, everything's hitting the news right now. Every channel, every website. The division. They're being exposed everywhere. James grabbed Sarah's hand. We need to go. Now. They ran out of the lab. Walsh was awake, being held at gunpoint by 2 FBI agents. More agents were arresting his men. The senator's helicopter was turning around, fleeing. "James," a voice called. A tall woman in an FBI jacket approached them. "Good work. We've been building this case for years, but we could never prove anything. Until now." "Sarah," James said, "this is Agent Chun, Mr. Chen's daughter. She's been helping me gather evidence against the division since I disappeared." "The letters?" Sarah asked. Agent Chun smiled. "My father helped coordinate them. We needed you to find the lab, but we also needed to make sure you were ready for what you'd find here. The letters weren't just clues. They were preparation." Over the next few hours, Sarah watched as FBI teams swarmed the mountain. Walsh and his men were taken away. News helicopters circled overhead. Her phone was flooded with news alerts about a massive government conspiracy being exposed. As the sun began to rise, Sarah, James, and Lisa sat in an FBI tent, drinking coffee and watching the chaos unfold on a small TV. The senator's private plane being stopped on the runway. Division members being arrested across the country. Stolen secrets being recovered. Decades of corruption exposed in a single morning. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "We'll have to testify," James said. "Tell the whole story. Well, most of it. The world doesn't need to know about the prediction program. As far as they're concerned, we just found evidence of their crimes. And after that," James took her hand. "After that, we go home. If you'll have me back." Sarah looked at her husband, thinner, tired, but still the man she loved. The man who had given up everything to protect her and the world from people who would have misused her father's work. "I have one condition," she said. "Anything. No more secrets." James smiled. "No more secrets." 3 months later, Sarah stood in her classroom, teaching her third graders about multiplication. Her life had slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. The trials were over. Walsh and the senator were in prison. The division was destroyed. James was home. That evening, as they sat on their back porch watching the sunset, just like they used to, James handed her an envelope. "The last one," he said. Sarah opened it carefully. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, we made it. The truth is out. The division is finished. Your father's work is safe from those who would misuse it. I wrote this letter last, but gave it to Lisa first. Asked her to hold it until everything was over. Because this letter isn't about secrets or clues or hidden truths. This letter is simply to say, I love you. I always have, from the moment I was assigned to protect you. Falling in love with you wasn't part of the mission. It was the best accident of my life. Your father once told me that love was like his program. It could predict the future too. Because when you truly love someone, you'll do anything to give them the future they deserve. You deserved the truth. You deserved the choice. You deserved to decide what happened to your father's legacy. And now we deserve our happy ending. Forever yours, James. Sarah folded the letter and looked at her husband. The sun was setting behind their apple tree, the one they had planted together, the one that had grown strong and tall despite everything. No more letters, she said. No more letters, he agreed. Just us. Just the truth. Sarah touched the empty space where her necklace used to hang. She didn't need it anymore. Her father's real legacy wasn't a program that could predict the future. It was the strength he had given her to face that future, whatever it might bring. James put his arm around her, and they watched the sun set on their new beginning. Later that night, Sarah went through their mail. Bills, advertisements, a magazine, normal things. No more mysterious letters. No more secrets. No more hidden truths. She smiled, thinking of all the letters that had led her here. Each one had been a piece of the puzzle, a step on the journey, a thread in the story of love that was stronger than duty, truth that was stronger than power, and a future that they had chosen together. Sarah Miller, daughter, teacher, wife, had followed the letters home. And home, she finally understood, wasn't just a place. It was the truth. It was love. It was the future they would build together.